Hello, Oscar. I'm not Liam Fogarty.
No, you look different again this week. I can't quite put my finger on it though.
He loves a holiday, that bloke, doesn't he?
I know.
Bit of time off.
Must be nice.
I know. We've already spoken about the teams that can make the top 8, but let's talk specifically about some betting.
Yep.
We're getting $1.60 for the Dragons to make the top 8. And it
Yeah.
sounds like we're all in agreement there, but what do the Dogs have to do from here to make it happen, specifically this week?
Yeah, they've probably got to maintain that win-loss record that they've held for most of the season. Really disappointing against Cronulla. I think they were just beaten through the middle. They don't have the biggest pack. I think the games where they've performed well this year, the Dragons' outside backs have been really productive. Last week, that wasn't the case, and I think that kind of had a flow-on effect throughout the game. So, yeah, the Dragons, they just need to keep competing and completing. Their ceiling is probably not as high as some of the other teams inside the top 8, but I think they well and truly deserve to be there, and they can do enough without being brilliant over the next 2 weeks to hold that spot. In saying that, there's 4 teams below them who we're going to talk about in a moment that I think there's things that all of those 4 clubs can do to get themselves there in 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely. It sounds like you're keen to take the $1.60 there for the Dragons. Let's talk the Broncos, though. They're on the second line, $4.75. Heading into the derby this Saturday night at Suncorp. I know you're pretty keen on fading my Finns. That just look like they've run out of steam at this point in the year. But Broncos.
I wouldn't mind fading the Bronx right now either, to be honest.
Yeah, tell me why.
I mean, we spoke about them earlier this week, last week against Parramatta. Very poor to start the game, very disconnected on the edges. I think some of the team list changes have been forced that Kevy's working with at the moment, but even just on paper last week, Jesse Arthurs and Dean Mariner were the winger and centre on the left-hand side, and then on the right you had Katoni and Selwyn. At the start of the year, Dean was a winger, Selwyn was a centre, Jesse Arthurs was the best winger, one of the best players in the game in the grand final last year.
He was.
So things have happened throughout the season for the Broncos to be where they are now, but it's just interesting to me, I think, that the back line they're working with the players that were available at the start of the year, it looks very different to round one. I think some of those early points Parramatta scored last week were a result of that lack of cohesion on the edges, Dean Mariner making some questionable decisions at centre. So, yeah, I think they've got a winnable game against the Dolphins pack that is just decimated and exhausted right now. The Redcliffe haven't clocked over 1,500 metres for a few weeks, which is, a fairly average kind of total run metres result. The Broncos can beat them through the middle here, and I think they've got enough repeatable actions through Adam Reynolds on that right edge. We saw that's what sparked their comeback last week. But yeah, I'm not super confident on either of these teams at the moment, to be honest.
It's definitely a stay away kind of game.
I think so, yeah.
The Finns run out of steam in the second half. Doesn't help that Felice Kafusi keeps making some very bad mistakes as well, but we won't get into that. Further down in the betting, we've got Newcastle at $6. This is good value, but you've already said on the show today that you're really not keen on what you're seeing from Newcastle.
Just don't trust. I mean, yeah, there's value there if you're a Knights fan who thinks they can do what they did last year and come home with a wet sail. I just think even last week they put up a few points against South Sydney, but Phoenix Crossland playing halfback on that left-hand side, which is Ponga's preferred edge. The amount of times he played short to Kai Piss-Paul with the defender in his face last week while Ponga was sweeping out the back with Richie Kenner in front of him, who respectfully doesn't have the pace to handle KP sweeping around in that jockey position. Just questionable decisions from Crossland, who's not a recognised halfback. He's played 2 or 3 games there over the last 3 weeks. I think it just speaks volumes about the lack of direction or I guess, clarity around who needs to be in those positions at the Knights. And yeah, for that reason, I think I've taken the Titans for a bit of an upset this week.
You sure have. Lastly, we'll talk about the Milk. They play the final game of the round against the Roosters. This is a very tough one. And I think the Milk, you're getting about $34 for them to make the top 8, which is huge odds.
It's a stretch.
They looked good in certain patches last week, but we've spoken all year about their inconsistencies. They can't string together 2 straight games of convincing performances. Anything the Raiders can do to beat the Roosters? Yeah,
it's a challenging task, isn't it? They did well enough to beat Penrith last week. Roosters are another big scalp. I think what they did last week against the Panthers really well was they just won the physical battle, which is something we spoke last week on the podcast about the Raiders roster being a bit old and tired at this point in the season, but they did enough last week. Corey Horsburgh was back. Big Red had some nice involvements through the middle of the field, and they beat Penrith at their own game, field position, completion and competing. They did really well, and then Fogarty and Xavier Savage, Jordan Rapps, they were able to come up with enough scoring opportunities. They can do it again against the Roosters side, but I'm not confident. I think Ricky's got a habit of getting them up for big games, which this is. they don't have the attack to go with the Roosters in a shootout. I think it worked in their favour that although Penrith are the best team in the competition and have been for a long time, they're not a really ruthless or efficient attacking team. So last week it was a battle of attrition and it was a grind, that's the Raiders through and through. I mean, the Roosters, they like winning games with cricket scores, and I'm not sure if the Raiders can go with them in a shootout. So, yeah, if they are to realise that $34 chance of making the finals, they need to make this a scrap this week.
Feels like the Roosters can just play like 60 minutes of football right now and get by.
And then turn off.
Pretty much,
Yeah, they're a funny team to get a read on. Really good and different style of footy in the rain 2 weeks ago, played really direct, and then we know they can move the ball through Sam Walker and Keary. So, yeah, they've snuck into second place on the ladder, the Chooks.
They look good.
Yeah. Warming at the right time.
Absolutely. All right, good chat as always, Oscar. It sounds like you're confident on the Dragons out of those teams, and the punters might follow you in.
I think I might back the Dragons to hold on to that spot.
Fingers crossed.
We'll see.
Chances are you're about to lose. For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website